President Nicolas Maduro denounced that U.S. sanctions against Venezuela are crimes against humanity. The National Liberation Army of Colombia began a nationwide armed strike. At least 6 doctors have died as a result of the COVID-19 in China, while more than 1,700 are infected with the disease. Hi, from the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba. This is From the South. I'm Cristina Escobar. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro held a press conference on Friday to explain the measures taken in the face of the attacks of the U.S. government. And despite the hostility, the Venezuelan head of state reiterated his willingness to dialogue with the U.S. authorities.
I believe in dialogue, and I will always say to Trump, I insist the best way to resolve this conflict is to talk, to dialogue. And if you want to get along with the person in charge in Venezuela, I am at your service, Mr. Donald Trump. But if what you want is to continue to be deceived and continue to saying that you want to invade Venezuela and that you will crush Venezuela, as you said in Congress, we will continue to follow our peaceful path as a country.
Venezuela is in the U.S. sanctions, and that's the reason why Jorge Arreaza, foreign minister, went to The Hague to denounce these as crimes against humanity. President Nicolas Maduro addressed the press about it. Let's hear what he said.
Venezuela tiene perseguida, congelada, inutilizada.
Venezuela has all its bank accounts across the world frozen, rendered useless, which it needs to function normally as a country. And all of this is a flagrant violation of the United Nations system, the legal system, international law, the system of global coexistence, and is a crime against humanity, against the people of Venezuela.
The armed forces of Venezuela began this Friday a nationwide deployment to undertake military exercises as part of the 2020 Bolivarian defense operation. A civic military parade was held this Friday in Táchira, a border state with Colombia. Saturday and Sunday will see military exercises aimed at strengthening territorial defenses across the country in the face of possible foreign attacks. Major General Ovidio Delgado stated that such exercises are part of the training and consolidation of security elements to strengthen national defense. The National Liberation Army of Colombia began this Friday a nationwide armed strike that will last until February 17th. The strike seeks to pressure the government of Iván Duque to resume the negotiations with the guerrilla organization. The move by the ELN comes in the context of a call by social movements and trade unions for a national strike on February 21st. In the same context, this Friday, truck drivers called a strike to pressure the mayor of Bogotá to lift transport restrictions along some roads of the Colombian capital. In Bolivia, lawmakers of the Movement Towards Socialism, which controls the 2 chambers of the Legislative Assembly with a 2/3 majority, decided to act on the legal persecution faced by their leaders and party members.
The candidate for the presidency for the Movement Towards Socialism, Luis Arce, is a victim of persecution through the courts. As soon as he was nominated, he was included as an accused in an open judicial process from 4 years back for supposed corruption. The senators of the Movement Towards Socialism decided to act.
Beginning today, we are going to accompany all the hearings of our leaders who are being accused of terrorism, of sedition, so that we can be witnesses of the Bolivian judicial system, so that it behaves within the framework of due process, of guarantees of objectivity and impartiality.
2/3 lives in both chambers. In the lower house, a statement was approved denouncing persecution and calling for respect for the human rights of those affected.
It is not only a council, but it is also corroborated by the pronouncement that was made by the United Nations. The international community is concerned by this type of attitudes. We hope that this is reflected on and agreed upon.
The People's Ombudsman accompanied and denounced the processes whereby political leaders have been prosecuted through the courts, all of whom have been leaders and people with connections to the Movement Towards Socialism. Those who have criticized the de facto government have also been targeted.
We believe, as the Ombudsman of the people, that no process or persecution, any person, former official, current authority, leader, non-leader, person who will or will not be a candidate, should be tolerated in any form. And here, the fundamental role of the Supreme Electoral Court is important.
The way in which prosecutors and judges operate, obedient to the de facto government, has been to arrest people and accuse them of sedition, terrorism, and of causing economic harm to the state. They have ordered a minimum 6 months of preventative jail.
This would be an abuse of criminal justice system. We are conducting a case-by-case review. Currently, we have 99 people who have been processed from the cases we've been seeing since the beginning of the month of November. Since then, there have been another percentage, and of the 99, currently 45 of them are still being held in jail as preventive measure.
Following the November 10th coup, the de facto government launched a hunt against those who opposed it. International organizations like the United Nations have expressed concern and have demanded that the legal persecution cease.
20,000 Brazilian oil workers remain on strike against layoffs and the privatization of the state-owned Petrobras company. Today marks the 13th day of the indefinite strike action as workers call for the reinstatement of over 1,000 laid-off employees, generating great economic uncertainty in several regions of the country. The strikers have reiterated that their intention is to guarantee both their jobs and fair prices for gas, gasoline and diesel. They have stressed that the closure of plants and the sale of refineries have led to rising unemployment across the country. And we keep talking about Brazil because Brazilian trade unions protested in front of the offices of the National Social Security Institute in at least 10 states and the federal district this Friday. All of this in rejection of the long queues to receive benefits. The union movement denounced that the Social Security Institute is immersed in a crisis, which began during Michel Temer's de facto administration. Spokespersons stated that the situation has worsened due to the increase in retirees with no pensions, which has generated long queues to request support. As a team from the International Monetary Fund continues its visit to Argentina for talks on restructuring its debt, Vice President Cristina Fernández had a sharp exchange with the fund's spokesperson in Washington. Responding to an earlier accusation, IMF Communication Director Jerry Rice insisted that no rules were broken in the granting of a massive $57 billion bailout loan to the previous administration of Mauricio Macri. In response, Fernández quoted the IMF's own regulations, which state that no country can use IMF funds to cover capital flight. She tweeted, "No comment," and stressed Argentinians know how to read. Protesters have taken to the streets of Argentina to condemn the IMF and support the government's efforts to renegotiate the country's foreign debt.
Protests in the streets of Buenos Aires, as the auditors from the International Monetary Fund continue their one-week visit. They are examining the government's accounts, peeking through the Fernández government's economic plan, and starting to renegotiate the foreign public debt.
We have the situation under control. Today, Argentina is not permitting the imposition of conditionalities on the economic program we are implementing. Do not doubt, ladies and gentlemen, members of Congress, that this whole government team will defend completely the interests of the Argentinian people.
The Argentinian people turned out en masse to demonstrate against the IMF and to support President Alberto Fernández's proposal to restructure the debt.
Today we are in this demonstration to say, strength to you, Alberto, the debt is to the people, and to show that the social movements, the unemployed organizations, and the anti-imperialist left is defending Argentina against the investment funds like Fidelity, which are provoking and extorting the country very aggressively.
Rescheduling payments and a substantial haircut, as proposed by the government, are also the demands these protesters are making of the International Monetary Fund.
We believe it is important for the people to mobilize in support of a government that is standing up to the IMF, because it is impossible to pay the debt with hunger, precarious jobs.
We are in favor of fulfilling the popular mandate expressed in the presidential elections, which is that the government of Alberto and Cristina achieve an agreement, a renegotiation, to get the country out of the disaster left by Macri and put an end to hunger in Argentina.
The demonstrators also agree with the government that the debt incurred by the government of Mauricio Macri is unpayable.
If we pay the debt in the conditions in which Macri left us, the only result will be that the people continue for decades to be sunk in poverty, with all the problems that means for independent social and economic development. We can't pay. The payments at the very least have to be rolled over so that the country can grow and the main debt, which is to the people, can be paid. And then we can put Argentina back on its feet and be able to pay the debts as appropriate.
The Argentinian people have already suffered the consequences of the IMF's prescriptions, and that is why they are rejecting its interference and impositions.
We're going to take a first break now, but stay with us. Hi, welcome back. The Caribbean Development Bank is set to decide whether to provide financing for the medical cannabis industry in Barbados. Responding to questions during the bank's annual news conference, President Dr. Warren Smith acknowledged that some states were legitimizing the marijuana industry and that he expected that the trend to continue. So far, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Antigua and Barbuda have approved marijuana cultivation for medical purposes and, in some cases, sacramental use. Barbados introduced legislation late last year in the form of the Medicinal Cannabis Industry Act, laying the groundwork for its launch to commence this year. And St. Kitts and Nevis is also moving closer to establishing a cannabis industry after the federal parliament passed a series of legislation on Wednesday. Following hours of debate, the liquor license, cannabis drugs and criminal records bills were all unanimously passed in the National Assembly. The majority of the bills are designed to help set the foundation for a well-managed cannabis industry in the country, primarily for the benefit of its nationals. The bills draw on international and regional experiences in the sector, according to the Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, Timothy Harris. Dominica is set to donate 10,000 face masks to China as the Asian country battles the COVID-19, which has claimed over 1,000 lives and infected tens of thousands. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt called on all nations to work with China as it battles to eradicate the virus, which has caused concerns around the world. He stressed that this is not a time for nations to adopt decisions that isolate the People's Republic of China, which he described as a steadfast friend. The Mexican government has presented the results of the migration plan intended to reduce the flow of migrants. According to official statistics, the number of people who have tried to cross into Mexican territory to reach the United States has significantly reduced.
8 months after the introduction of Mexico's migration plan, the government says the flow of migrants has declined by just under 75%. According to Mexico's foreign minister, this has also led to fewer detentions on the US-Mexico border.
Not only the influx of people has declined, but it has also become irregular. That is our main goal. I want to stress this. Our goal is that people who are in Mexican territory are there lawfully.
Between July 2019 and January this year, the number of migrants entering Mexico irregularly has dropped from 144 to 36,000 people. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador recalled that Mexico was bullied into tightening its policy after the US government threatened to impose sanctions on Mexican goods.
I don't have any regrets, because we have been able to defend our sovereignty, which is fundamental to us.
The plan has been widely criticized by civil society organizations and by Mexican lawmakers who have visited detention centers in the state of Chiapas, where the government has invested more than $20 million in the construction and renovation of the facilities.
I think it's important that we stop criminalizing migrants, including children and young adults. Although this visit has showed us the actual circumstances and what is happening, but we are still left with some doubts. When we arrived to the National Institute for Migration, we found that everything smelled freshly painted.
Apart from reducing the influx of migrants, the Mexican government in 2020 has deported more than 9,000 migrants, mostly Central Americans, who decided to make the perilous journey to the United States in hope of a better future.
The hunger, the cold, thinking about my family, wondering if they're doing well or not. One doesn't know what this journey will look like.
Still, the number of asylum requests continues to increase. Last year, more than 70,000 people submitted asylum applications, hoping to be able to leave behind poverty, hunger, and violence in their own countries.
The Canadian National Railway took the decision this Friday to shut down its Eastern Canada operations due to protests by several Indigenous groups. Indigenous communities are protesting against the construction of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. On Wednesday, they launched a legal challenge of the climate impact of fossil fuel projects on Indigenous territories. Anti-pipeline protests have spread across Canada in opposition to the proposed pipeline. Demonstrators near Canadian National Railway tracks in Ontario, Canada's most populated province, disrupted passenger trains and goods transportations for a sixth day on Wednesday. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier opened the 56th edition of the Munich Security Conference this Friday, being held in the midst of several international crises and, according to its director Wolfgang Ischinger, at a time when the values of the West are being questioned. The conference will discuss a theme coined Westlessness, which is defined as the loss of the common understanding of what it means to be part of the West. Discussions are also expected on these conflicts in Syria, Libya and Yemen, among others. In addition, bilateral meetings and a meeting of ministers of the Global Coalition Against the Islamic State will be held. International cooperation in the fight against the new coronavirus and computer security issues will also be addressed. And we're taking one last break, but when we come back, we'll have an update on China's Hi, welcome back. China has recorded another spike in the number of people infected with COVID-19. The number of confirmed cases now stands at 63,855. The significant rise is attributed to the change in the method of counting cases in the hardest hit Chinese province of Hubei. Meanwhile, the National Health Commission reported another 121 people that had died as the total death toll neared 1,400. The scale of the epidemic swelled this week after authorities in central Hubei province changed their criteria for counting cases, adding thousands of new patients to their tally. At least 6 medical doctors have also died as a result of the COVID-19, but we're going to other topics because in Japan, an initial group of passengers who tested negative for COVID-19 disembarked from a cruise ship quarantine off the coast of Japan on Friday to complete their isolation period in government-provided accommodation. A Japanese government official confirmed 11 passengers aged 80 and over were taken off the Diamond Prince ship and transported to facilities where they will stay until the quarantine ends on February 19th. More than 200 people on board the ship have been diagnosed with the virus since it arrived to Japan's coast on February 3rd and was placed in quarantine. Concerned about the stress the conditions are placing on the several hundreds elderly passengers on the ship, Japanese authorities said they would allow those who meet certain conditions and test negative for the virus to complete their quarantine on land if they choose. And passengers on a cruise ship that was turned away from ports across Asia over fears it could be carrying people infected with COVID-19 finally began disembarking in Cambodia on Friday. Prime Minister Hun Sen welcomed around 100 tourists who were handed flowers as they stepped ashore after an uncertain 2 weeks at sea. The MS Westerdam was supposed to be taking its 2,257 passengers and crew on a 14-day cruise around East Asia, beginning in Hong Kong on February 1st and ending on Saturday in Yokohama, Japan. But the vessel was barred from docking by Japan, Guam, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Thailand. Cambodia announced this week that the ship could dock in on its southern coast. Local media reports have informed that Syria's air defense system intercepted several missiles launched from Israel before they met their targets on Thursday. A video released by state news agency SANA shows the moment the missiles were intercepted, followed by an explosion. SANA reported that the missiles were launched from the occupied Golan Heights were destroyed over the capital Damascus. Israel has not yet claimed responsibility for the attack. In his State of the Nation address on Thursday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa highlighted moves to address the struggling economy and the prospect of future power cuts.
Many maintenance, but also in the rural areas. So in the rural areas, we will prioritize building bridges. It warns me that our children die crossing the river Styx, and also how to build access roads in the rural areas. So it's a massive plan, but I think it's doable, and we'll come back and report next year.
We named the rules that were transgressed. It's now come time for Parliament to take enough serious action that the Ethics Committee is brought into play, and at least a month's salary is deducted from each EFF member that decided to disrupt the House today.
This is well, so don't worry.
No, everything went well. I was nervous. I was excited and looking forward to it, and finally it came to pass. I'm very much excited.
Dozens of demonstrators marched through Malawi's capital, Lilongwe, on Thursday to demand the resignation of Jane Ansa, chairperson of the Malawi Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission has come under even more fire since the Constitutional Court overturned last year's presidential election on February 3rd, quoting irregularities. The court ordered a fresh election to be held no later than May. Protesters are calling for a new electoral commission to handle the exercise. The acting chairman of Nigeria's Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Ibrahim Magu, said that Nigerian youth are crucial to the success of the anti-corruption crusade as they represent the future. Speaking in Abuja on Friday during a youth-led nationwide march against corruption, Magu stressed that the program was focused mainly on youth support for the Commission in the fight against corruption. He expressed worry over the levels of corruption in Nigeria, saying this was contributing to youth unemployment. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And please join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.